hard work into a budding construction empire.
She had a really good job. She was really striking. She had a nice figure. She was fun.
He was the fun-loving attorney who captured her heart.
He was a happy-go-lucky kind of guy.
From that point on, they were in a full-on relationship.
But soon, a cold-blooded crime would put their red-hot romance on ice.
There was what appeared to be a dead body wrapped in a blanket.
As investigators searched for answers, they unearthed dark secrets kept hidden for years.
He told one of his neighbors that he was interested in her.
She thought he was having an affair with the housekeeper.
She just couldn't control the dark side.
I had went to lunch, and when I came back, there was a butcher knife in my chair.
I've not investigated a case like this since. I hope I never do, but it's one that I'll never forget.
Salinas, California, September 1st, 2010. It's a Wednesday afternoon, and police are responding to a 911 call at the home of local attorney Mark Hafen.
Some of his coworkers had called dispatch and notified them that they hadn't seen him in days and asked for a welfare check.
His house was maybe 5 minutes away from the office. So I drove over there. I had a gut feeling that something bad had happened because Mark would always call if he was running late. It wasn't like Mark not to call me.
They were really concerned about him. The officers checked all of the doors and windows in an attempt to get in and located a single open window.
The smallest officer that was there was tasked with climbing through the window, which he did. Once he got through that bedroom window, he tried to open the front door but couldn't because it had been screwed or nailed closed. Tried to open the sliding glass door to the backyard where the other officers were waiting, but again could not get that open because it had been screwed closed.
Eventually, the officer is able to raise the garage door.
They went inside immediately. They began a search of the house, and the odor inside led those officers to think that someone was dead or something was dead. From there was a hallway. We went down that hallway. There was a bedroom. The officers found the victim dead.
He was between a bed and a dresser on the floor. And the space wasn't very big, maybe 12 to 18 inches, and his body was rolled up on his side. And he had multiple layers of blankets and sleeping bags wrapped around him.
Once the coroner pulled that bag back slightly, he noticed right away his skull that it was broken in several places. We knew there had been some violence, but we still didn't know if it had been self-inflicted.
The son of a prominent local veterinarian, Mark Welker Hafen was born and raised in the Salinas area.
He was a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. He was always joking around and liked to have fun.
As a teenager, Mark was an avid surfer, regularly making the half-hour drive to the coast to catch some waves.
When I was a junior in high school, I had a class with Mark, and I started surfing, and he was one of the guys that was at the beach.
But surfing wasn't Mark's only passion. After high school, he set his sights on becoming a lawyer.
He was working throughout the day, and then at night he'd go to Monterey College of Law, and he put himself through law school that way.
I basically met Mark at the beach. We both surfed at Moss Landing. I only found out after the fact he'd gone to law school and was practicing in Salinas.
He was an attorney who took cases maybe that other attorneys wouldn't take, maybe charged less money for those that couldn't afford the steep price of someone else.
Over the years, Mark's practice thrived, but his personal life wasn't nearly as successful. By 2005, Mark was in his 50s with 2 failed marriages behind him and 3 grown children.
His last divorce, he took that really hard, so he was trying to find himself after that. I think it was like a midlife crisis is what he was going through.
That year, Mark took a case that would change his life forever. Like Mark Hafen, Virginia Turner was a Salinas native through and through. Though unlike Mark, Virginia didn't have the luxury of a laid-back middle-class upbringing.
Virginia Turner came from a poor family and grew up in sort of, I'm not going to say poverty, but grew up in not as much money.
She kind of had an on and off relationship with her mother, although her mother certainly tried to help her at various times. And she was pretty independent in that she moved out when she was 16 and lived on her own with a job, going to school. And so when she was in high school, she was actually living in her own place.
Hardworking and ambitious, Virginia was determined to forge a better life for herself.
She ended up becoming involved in construction and becoming a contractor, and then had a contracting business of her own.
It was like a cleanup business where if there was like a storm damage to a house or a business, she would clean that up. Or if there was a hazmat, she'd clean that up.
Building a business in a male-dominated field like construction was no easy task. But Virginia won over clients with both her work ethic and her personality.
When you talk to people that knew her back as a young lady, they all talk about how dynamic she was.
Like Mark Hafen, Virginia's professional success did not always lead to romantic success.
She always seemed to have been involved in kind of tumultuous relationships.
In the mid-90s, Virginia's hard luck in love seemed to turn around when she met an outgoing Renaissance man named Gordon Legault.
I was in the local country music bar, and a friend of mine introduced me to her there, and she ended up giving me a ride home. The next day, she called me and asked me if I wanted to go for lunch, and I did. She was really striking. She had a nice figure. She was fun, and she was outgoing. She would do anything for anybody. She had a really good job. She would wine and dine and buy stuff and take me on trips. Mexico, San Francisco, and Las Vegas.
But like all of Virginia's other relationships, the ups and downs proved too much to bear.
It was good for a while, and then it would be bad, and then it would be good, and then be bad. And so we had a lot of arguments. We would have a spat, and it was ridiculous stuff, and I would say to myself, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. It was just too much after a while.
Over the next decade, Virginia's work life continued to thrive. And though she kept putting herself out on the dating scene, she could never quite seem to find Mr. Right. Then, in 2004, Virginia went through another breakup, one that took a huge toll on her and on her business.
She seemed to have a fairly good business until she got hooked up with a partner that worked in the business with her, and then because of domestic violence with him, she wanted to separate out the business, and that's when she decided to file bankruptcy.
To handle her bankruptcy, Virginia needed a lawyer, so she turned to one of the most respected and affordable attorneys in Salinas, Mark Hafen.
Virginia Turner was actually a client of ours, and there was one time when she came in and Mark came out of his office and he said, "I'm going to lunch now." And so I put two and two together that Mark and Virginia were going to lunch. And so that was the first time that I was thinking, okay, well, maybe it was a friendly lunch, but it ended up being something more.
From that point on, they were in a full-on relationship.
And unlike the couple's previous relationships, this one appeared to have staying power.
Mark and Virginia were a cute couple. They liked country music and they liked to go line dancing.
Mark was this sort of laid-back surfer guy, game for anything, and Virginia was this high-octane spark plug of a woman.
After just a couple months of dating, Mark and Virginia moved in together.
He owned a home on Don Pedro Lake, and they lived there together. They seemed to make a terrific couple, two successful professionals who had a lot in common and seemed to be deeply attracted to each other.
In September of 2009, Mark inherited his mother's home on the west side of Salinas. Though the house was sorely in need of some improvements, Mark and Virginia thought that moving into the home where Mark grew up would be the best place for them to take the next step in their relationship.
Virginia was going to help him remodel that.
He was happy. You know, he was dating someone and he was spending time with someone. And, I knew that's what he wanted.
But sadly, Mark and Virginia would never get the chance to transform his childhood home into the house of their dreams. That's because a lifeless body has been found on the floor of the couple's master bedroom, and as detectives survey the scene, the mystery only deepens.
Blood all over the walls, bed in disarray. How did he get on the floor? What did he die of?
Coming up, as detectives attempt to answer those questions, another, more sinister side to this tragedy is revealed.
He was seriously worried that his life was in danger.
Then I knew something was terribly wrong.
As these facts start coming in, you hear all these different stories. It was sick. I'm in disbelief.
California natives Mark Hafen and Virginia Turner seemed to be living the perfect life together.
They loved each other and they lived together. Life for Mark and Virginia was as good as it gets.
But on September 1st, 2010, Mark and Virginia's picture-perfect romance was ripped apart at the seams. Police responding to a welfare check in Salinas have discovered a lifeless body on the floor of Mark Hafen's master bedroom.
The body was in a space beside the bed and beside a bureau. It had 4 different layers of blankets on it.
As investigators uncover the body, it's immediately apparent that it is indeed the man they've been called to check on, and that his death was a violent one.
The skull was somewhat crushed and some brain matter was oozing out.
Officers immediately bring homicide detectives in on the case.
When we arrived on scene, there were several officers on scene and Mr. Hafen's secretary.
I just felt numb. My headspace was crazy. I don't remember a lot. I remember that I needed to do whatever the police needed.
According to Mark's secretary, Missy, Mark had been living with his girlfriend, Virginia Turner.
I didn't hear from her for 2 days, and that wasn't like Virginia.
Detectives ask Missy to stand by for questioning while they begin assessing the scene.
So as we conducted our walkthrough, we go room to room and try to take an inventory of what we see. The spare bedroom was in disarray. There was loose change strewn about the floor and a single white garbage bag with a red drawstring. And almost every door and window that we came across had been screwed shut from the inside.
In the living room, detectives find a clue that suggests Virginia might have also been a victim.
There was also a robe on the couch that looked to have small droplets of blood and droplets of blood on a pillow.
If this is Virginia's robe, you have to wonder if Virginia was attacked here and Mark was attacked in the bedroom. This could mean that Miss Turner's body is somewhere inside the home as well.
A thorough search of the entire house yields no sign of another body, but detectives do find other forensic evidence.
In the master bedroom, there was a small dish, a glass dish with a purple liquid in it, a very strong scented cleaning solution. And of course, our thought was that it was meant to try to mask the odor of the decomposing body on the floor.
As CSIs process this evidence, detectives turn their attention back to Mark's body.
When we went in there, we saw blood splatter, ceiling, on the walls.
Based on the spatter and the location of his body and the way the bed was situated, it looked as though he had probably been laying in bed on his left side, head on the pillow, facing away from the door, likely meaning that he never knew that the attack was coming.
As investigators continue examining the crime scene, they find what they believe was the weapon used in the attack on Mark.
In the master bedroom, behind the door, was a large bat-type weapon. This was made out of very thick steel The stem was rebar, and the head of it was shaped almost like a hammer, was a very, very large nut. It was extremely, extremely heavy.
It had some blood and brain matter on it.
The question now is, who would want this mild-mannered attorney dead? And who would be capable of wielding such a deadly weapon?
We started to think about how strong someone would have to be to use that weapon.
One theory revolves around a very sinister element at work on the streets of Salinas.
Salinas PD does experience a very high violent crime level. We do have a large gang population.
There is a persistent gang problem. It's pervasive here in Salinas. The communities are dealing with it as best they can, but it hasn't gone away yet.
With the house in obvious disarray and the strange way the doors were screwed shut, police can't help but suspect that Mark's murder may be gang-related. The fact that he's an attorney only adds to that speculation.
Being a defense attorney, it's your job to give your client the most vigorous but honest defense that you can.
In my experience as an attorney, and really for any criminal defense attorney, there's always that chance that a client feels they didn't get a fair shake, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration.
As the coroner removes Mark's body from the house, detectives chart a plan for unraveling this mystery. Their first move is to speak with Mark Hafen's secretary, Missy Tompkins, who was already at the scene when police arrived.
We always ask that they try to keep witnesses or reporting parties around long enough that we can get a statement the day of the incident rather than tracking someone down later and trying to get information that's vital at the time. I was tasked with interviewing Mr. Hafen's secretary, and the last time that the secretary heard from him was Friday afternoon.
We spoke briefly with Missy to find out what she knew when she had last seen him.
Mark was a good guy, a funny guy, got along well with everybody. Everybody who knew him loved him.
Missy asserts that Mark had no ties to the Salinas gang scene, nor did he ever legally represent any of the area's drug dealers.
He was not involved in drugs. He was highly against it. I mean, he only took the pain pills because he had a bad back.
In their initial search of the house, police found a significant amount of prescription pain pills, and they were legally prescribed to Mark.
The secretary was very privy to Mr. Hafen's personal life. She was very clear that they were not only work associates, but friends.
Mark was genuinely a friend because I went through some family issues while I was working with Mark. He was able to give me some time off.
As detectives continue to press Missy for information, a crowd begins to gather outside the Hafen residence.
The crime scene at Mark's house was kind of like, one of those movies on TV. I remember all his neighbors were out there and everyone was just so upset that, this happened to him because he was such a good guy.
However, there's one person who's still nowhere to be found, Mark's live-in girlfriend, Virginia. Unsure where Virginia is, or if she's in harm's way, or even alive, detectives dispatch several patrol officers to search for her.
We started going to addresses where she could possibly be, where she's been in the past, and where people say that she might be, looking for her in her car, knocking on doors. And we did that throughout the night. We knocked on some doors at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to find someone that might know her whereabouts.
Coming up, with the search yielding no sign of Virginia, authorities turn to the press for help, and a tip comes in that turns the case on its head and casts a dark shadow over Mark and Virginia's relationship.
She wanted to make it quite clear that Mark was hers and nobody else's.
Police in Salinas, California, are desperately trying to solve the mystery of who killed Mark Hafen, the laid-back attorney and live-in boyfriend of Virginia Turner.
This was kind of a whodunit from the beginning. We needed to determine what the motive was and why someone would come into this man's home and murder him and leave him to be found.
Adding to the mystery is the fact that Virginia Turner is still missing. After an extensive search comes up empty, detectives decide to cast a wider net.
They released it to the media that Mr. Hafen was deceased, that we were looking for anyone that had any information about how that may have happened, and particularly that we were looking for Virginia Turner.
Police don't know if she's dead, if she's alive, or if she's even a suspect in the crime. All they do know is that they need to find out where she is, and they need to find her as soon as possible.
And when the coroner's office releases the results of Mark Hafen's autopsy, a clearer timeline begins to emerge.
Based on the autopsy and the coroner's investigations, determined that Mr. Hafen was probably killed Friday night, maybe early Saturday morning.
And that's not all police learned from the autopsy.
The medical examiner was almost able to match identically the skull up with the shape of the nut on the head of that bat. And there was no question at that point that that had been the murder weapon.
As news of Mark's death and Virginia's disappearance makes its way through Salinas, folks there are inevitably drawn into the case.
He was very well liked. It was a shocker to the community that he had been murdered.
We were fielding phone calls as soon as the media had been notified that Mr. Hafen was deceased and we were looking for people that had information. We were receiving calls on the hour, people that knew him. We had calls come in all the time.
Within hours, one of those calls provides detectives with a potentially promising lead.
A neighbor calls in and claims that he saw both Virginia and Mark on Friday afternoon before Mark disappeared. The next door neighbor talked to Virginia sometime in the afternoon. Mr. Hafen actually went golfing with the neighbor's 16-year-old son when he got out of school at 3 o'clock. So Virginia was on the premises talking to the neighbor when the 16-year-old put his clubs in Mark's car and they were leaving. Virginia said that she needed in the house.
But that's not all. According to the neighbor, later that weekend, another woman came to the house. A woman who he believed to be Mark's housekeeper.
She banged on the window to see if he was home. No one was answering the door.
The neighbor says at that point, the woman went to the back of the house and he never saw her again.
That was important to us as investigators when we learned that Mr. Hafen had probably died on Friday or early Saturday morning.
Detectives are desperate to find out who this woman is and what, if anything, she has to do with Mark's murder.
The main goal became finding her and figuring out where she was and trying to get her to come in and contact us and make a statement.
Armed with this new information, investigators pay another visit to Mark's secretary, Missy Tompkins, to see if she has any additional information about the woman seen at Mark's house the weekend he was murdered. According to Missy, Mark had recently hired a new housekeeper named Miriam Felix.
Miriam Felix went to Mr. Hafen for a divorce from her husband. She had, I think, 2 children, so she was trying to establish life on her own.
Mark always had a housekeeper doing his laundry and, the dry cleaning and cleaning up the house. So he knew that Miriam needed money. So he hired her.
She was in his home on a regular basis, and she would come by the office, and Missy, the secretary, would pay her.
But there may have been more to their relationship than it appeared.
Some people do say that they started a romantic relationship.
Mr. Hafen told one of his neighbors that he was interested in her.
She was a very pretty woman, but I don't know if they were dating on that time.
Could Mark Hafen have been caught up in a love triangle that had turned deadly? Now that they have a name, police waste no time trying to locate Miriam Felix.
We started to gather as much information about her as we could. Where does she work? What kind of car does she drive? We were hopeful that we would be able to speak with her and she'd be willing to talk with us.
Within 24 hours, police tracked down Miriam at the apartment she moved into after her divorce. Right away, Miriam admits to being at Mark and Virginia's house the weekend of his murder.
So when we spoke with Miss Felix, she said that she had gone to the house looking for him because she wasn't able to reach him by telephone either, because he owed her some money.
According to Miriam, when she got to Mark's house, Virginia was there.
Miss Felix was banging on the window trying to see if anyone was home, Virginia began to yell at her, cuss at her, call her names, and told her to go away, that if she needed money, she could go to the office and get a check from Missy.
Miriam tells police that at that point she left and never saw or heard from Mark Hafen again.
Detectives asked Miss Felix about the nature of her relationship with Mark. They asked her point blank, "Are you having an affair with him?" When we talked to Miss Felix, she absolutely denied that.
But if Miriam Felix wasn't having an affair with Mark Hafen, why was Virginia so upset with her?
So at this point, investigators can't definitively know if Miriam is a bona fide suspect and Virginia is also a victim, or if Virginia is somehow involved in the murder and Miriam is telling the truth.
There was only one person who could answer that question, and so far, there was no sign of her.
We needed to find Virginia Turner.
On September 2nd, after almost 24 hours of frantic searching, detectives finally get the break they've been looking for.
A community service officer that was working at the front desk at the police department lobby came back into the investigations division and said that Virginia Turner was in the lobby. She had told the community service officer that she wanted to talk with a homicide detective about Mr. Hafen. Her sister had convinced her she needed to come down to the police department to talk with us.
Detectives begin the interview by asking Virginia to pace them through the events of the previous weekend.
She basically said that they had had a fight on Friday night and that he had gone to sleep, he wasn't feeling well, and that he never came out of the bedroom.
Then she went to the home of her mother and said she wasn't feeling well, that her and Mark had a fight.
According to Virginia, she hadn't spoken to Mark since she'd left their house. That's when detectives decide to broach the subject of Mark's death.
I said to her, I want to talk to you about how Mark ended up dead.
Virginia's reaction to the news takes the veteran detectives by surprise.
She basically passed out and she fell off the chair onto the floor.
When she was told that Mark was dead, she didn't believe it. She thought he was just there asleep. So when they said that he was dead, she was totally in a state of shock. She did faint.
Paramedic that got on scene first, they made the determination that because she was complaining of heart pain, that they were transported to the hospital.
Now more than ever, detectives believe speaking to Virginia Turner is the key to solving Mark Hafen's murder. The question is, will they ever get that chance? Coming up, detectives zero in on a suspect and discover there may be another side to the story of Mark Hafen's death.
He actually grabbed the metal bar. She says that's when I got physical.
Less than 36 hours into the investigation of Mark Hafen's brutal murder, police in Salinas, California now believe that Mark's girlfriend, Virginia Turner, holds the key to solving the mystery. But when detectives inform Virginia of Mark's death, things take an unexpected turn.
She was complaining of heart pain, that they were transported to the hospital. So our interview ended at that point. The medical personnel checked her out. She didn't have any life-threatening condition.
The following morning, after being treated and released from the hospital, investigators continue Virginia's questioning, though she still appears to be in a state of shock.
Our interview with Virginia Turner was interesting. She had a flat affect almost the entire time. Very little emotion in her tone, almost creepy.
Virginia tells the investigators that she and Mark had gotten into a heated argument on Friday night over his supposed feelings for housekeeper Miriam Felix.
I think Virginia was just threatened because she was pretty. Virginia made it clear that, Mark was hers and nobody else's.
At some point in the late hours of Friday or early as Saturday, the argument gets to the point where Mark wants to leave the house. He's taken some medication. He's been drinking a little bit. Virginia says that she doesn't want him to leave. She says that she blocks his access from leaving the bedroom. She says that's when it got physical. He actually, according to her, grabbed the metal bar. He kept it there in the room for home defense, for protection.
She said he had pushed her up against the wall with the rebar under her chin and punched her many times in the face.
When she told us about getting hit over the eye, I looked at it myself very closely, and it may have been slightly swollen, but there was no laceration, there was no bruise. It was hard for me to tell if it was swollen or it wasn't swollen.
Virginia claims that the attack on her winded Mark, who, in an effort to catch his breath, dropped his homemade metal bat.
He sat down on the bed, and she thought he was going to lunge back up at her, so she took the rebar and she hit him.
She hit him with it. He rolls off of the bed, and she's like, oh, okay, well, this is over. She puts the weapon back up against the wall and then goes back out into the house and stays there the whole weekend. And that she just left on Monday.
It's a chilling story, but is it true? Virginia's statement doesn't explain the blankets Mark was wrapped in at the time detectives discovered his body. They press Virginia for an explanation. What she says truly shocks them.
She wrapped him up to keep him warm. The interview with Virginia Turner was surreal. She made it seem as though she were doing him a favor.
It was a bizarre story, to say the least, but detectives are now fairly certain they know who killed Mark Hafen. The real question is, does the killer herself realize what she's done?
She basically said that she had spent the weekend at the house, that he never came out of the bedroom throughout the weekend.
That he might be dead didn't even enter her mind.
Was this truly a case of self-defense, as Virginia claimed? And was an argument over Mark's cleaning lady, Miriam Felix, what actually triggered this fateful encounter? Investigators decide it's time to learn a little bit more about Mark and Virginia's relationship in the days and weeks leading up to Mark's death.
From the outside, this relationship looks picture perfect. They fall hard for each other and they're building this perfect little life together. But that's not the picture that Virginia's painting.
As the investigation gets more detailed, we start looking at every instance where someone told us that they had any type of conflict. Are there witnesses to it? Can someone come in and testify to the pattern? I mean, how long has this been going on? Did Virginia ever seek restraining order? Did Mr. Hafen ever seek a restraining order?
Speaking with Mark's friends, investigators learned that Mark and Virginia's relationship had been a healthy one for several years, but had grown increasingly volatile.
They had been on again, off again, and then ultimately in the last year or so, it had been very tumultuous.
In fact, in the last 12 months, Mark and Virginia had blazed a trail of arguments, fistfights, restraining orders, and recriminations across the entire city of Salinas.
The type of things that most people don't experience during a relationship. Something drew them together, and something drove them apart. Tumultuous would probably be an understatement.
Mark's associates also claim that the lion's share of the chaos in the relationship stemmed from Virginia's burgeoning drug habit, in particular, her use of methamphetamine.
Mark had mentioned that he caught Virginia taking some drugs and basically gave her an ultimatum. And then just things from there, it just seemed like it was getting worse.
I mean, certainly if someone's taking recreational drugs, that can be an issue, and methamphetamine is particularly powerful.
Allegedly, Virginia's drug habit, coupled with her penchant for jealousy, created drama for Mark at home and at work.
She would call him constantly throughout the day, 10 times, 20 times. They would argue, and it just didn't seem like it was going the right way.
Mark's friends tell detectives that at that point, he decided the best thing for the couple to do was take a little break. But Virginia wasn't having it.
I don't know if she was like stalking him or if she was following him or whatever she was doing, but she was so jealous that she came by the office and she was very irate.
I asked Mark to go back to his office, and that's when I said, I don't want that woman in here again. Get her out of here now. But she kept coming.
He didn't need or want her around anymore, and it just looked as though she could not deal with that. She just could not let go.
But it's Mark's secretary, Missy Tompkins, who reveals the most disturbing incident involving Virginia.
Mark and Virginia got into an argument, and I had went to lunch, and when I came back, there was a butcher knife in my chair.
Everybody is absolutely sure that Virginia stuck that knife in that chair in a fit of pique. That was her way of expressing her anger and kind of like leaving her own personal little calling card.
It became clear that her behavior, especially the jealousy part of it and how she talked about him, she thought that he was seeing other women.
Mark's friends say that shortly after the knife incident, Mark decided to make his and Virginia's temporary break a permanent one.
He evicted her. He started an unlawful detainer action that the sheriff came and said that she was no longer allowed to be on his property.
Almost every door and window that we came across had been screwed shut from the inside. Windows into window panes, doors into door jambs. And you immediately began to wonder, is this something the victim did in advance to keep the suspect out? Or is this something the suspect did after the fact?
Mark's friends also tell police that just days before his death, Mark had been rushed to the hospital.
Virginia Turner told the hospital personnel that he had mixed up too many of his medications and he wasn't himself. And when Mark was released from the hospital, he got a copy of that medical report and he went to the hospital and asked to have that changed. He was not taking medication.
He thought that she'd been poisoning him.
This information also shed additional light on the meds that were found in Mark's system at the time of his death. Perhaps Virginia was trying to poison him, and then when that didn't work, she decided to kill him the old-fashioned way.
Was Virginia Turner a jealous woman who believed that if she couldn't have Mark Hafen, nobody could? Or had she been telling the truth and killed Mark purely out of self-defense? To help answer that question, police reach out to a man named Gordon Legault, whom Virginia had dated prior to Mark.
I always had an uneasy feeling with her that we could be in a knockdown, drag-out, hollering match at any time. It was kind of like walking on eggshells.
And according to Gordon, a mystery illness similar to Mark's also figured into his breakup with Virginia.
I was curled up in a ball, the house, sweating, with the chills, so I went to the hospital. Stayed, for 2 days. They didn't have any idea what was wrong with me. I got better, and I went home. My whole family was telling me at the time that she was poisoning me. So I think that had quite a bit to do with her personality. And I think that's how she was with all her relationships. She was insanely jealous.
Gordon Legault's statement casts even more suspicion over Virginia, but detectives are still grappling with one confounding piece of physical evidence.
You see this weapon, you know how heavy it is, you can barely lift it. It would be very difficult to raise above your head and swing.
But according to those who knew Virginia well, she's more than capable of wielding a weapon that heavy.
She worked for years in construction and construction cleanup. She knows her way around a sledgehammer.
Armed with this information, on September 3rd, 2010, the Salinas police book Virginia Turner on the charge of first-degree murder.
We told her that she was under arrest for his murder. At that time, she told intake staff that she wanted to kill herself. So the jail's protocol is she goes into a safety cell.
It appears police have everything they need to put Virginia Turner behind bars for the murder of Mark Hafen. Which comes as reassuring news to Mark's friends and colleagues.
She knew that Mark told me everything, and I would be the one that would basically let the police know what was going on. So I was afraid for myself. When I found out that the police had Virginia in their custody, I was relieved.
Coming up, as the case goes to trial, could Virginia's version of events sway the jury in her favor?
He was attacking her, beating her, and she hit him in self-defense to get away from him. She was a battered woman.
prosecutors in Salinas, California, have formally charged 44-year-old Virginia Turner with the murder of her live-in boyfriend, attorney Mark Hafen.
We found her, but that's a small part of it. Now, if she did it, we need to successfully prosecute her so she doesn't do it to somebody else.
I never go into trial thinking I have a home run. We prepare to rebut every point that the defense is going to raise.
On November 26, 2012, after extensive case preparations and hearings, Virginia Turner's trial gets underway at the Monterey County Courthouse. Having spent the past 2 years in jail, Virginia appears to be a shell of her former self.
I think that her mental state did begin to deteriorate over time being in jail. I think she felt terrible about what happened.
But according to the prosecutor's opening statement, what happened on that fateful night in 2010 was murder, plain and simple.
She killed him because she was jealous. He was pushing her out of the relationship, and she thought he had a new love interest. According to prosecutors, Virginia tried to poison Mark by pumping him with all sorts of drugs. And when that didn't kill him, she decided to take a more direct approach to ending his life.
But Virginia's attorneys tell a different story, one of abuse and ultimately self-defense. And they have an expert witness to back it up.
I'm an expert in domestic violence, well known around the state. And my assessment of Miss Turner was that she was a battered woman, that she had experienced physical, sexual, verbal, and psychological abuse in her relationship with Mark.
I think she feared for her life. As a result, she picked up this club and hit him over the head, and that checks the boxes on self-defense.
You could say you're beaten all day, but show me reports of violence, show me wounds, show me some evidence. There wasn't any.
On December 12th, 2012, the jury delivers its verdict.
She was found guilty and convicted of first-degree murder.
As soon as I heard guilty, I just wanted to, basically cry because, there was justice for Mark.
In the state of California, first-degree murder is 25 years to life. The judge has no discretion.
But even with Virginia now locked away for at least 25 years, those who knew the couple in their better days are still left with the nagging question of why.
I don't see any reason why anything like this should have happened. Sometimes the more you push someone away, the more they become obsessed.
I think that when she met Mark Hafen, she was impressed that he was an attorney, was impressed with the amount of money he was making and the things that he could provide for her. And when he was thinking of leaving her, this was something that she just could not handle, couldn't take, and couldn't accept.
For more information on Snapped, go to oxygen.com.